Hi, everybody. Well, sadly, we've lost another rock legend. Ace Frehley has passed at the age of 74. And this news just com- took me completely by surprise. I had no idea that Ace was ill or was in the hospital. In passing, looking at Blabbermouth, I had seen a couple weeks ago that he had canceled a show, but I didn't think anything of it. I just thought he's probably just sick with the flu or something. And then I had seen, I don't know if it was his wife or somebody in his family asking for prayers for him. But I didn't read the article and I still didn't think anything of it. And I'm recording this on Friday, the day after the news had gotten out that Ace had passed. A couple days ago, just randomly in my YouTube feed, a video came up of Ace Frehley's 10 greatest solos. And I had sort of been thinking about Kiss and Ace specifically. And last night, Thursday, the day that we found out that Ace had passed, I was playing bass for a theater show. And a woman that I know was in the audience at the show, and she's a local DJ. And a couple months ago, Ace had played near where I lived, and I couldn't go because I was out of town. But this woman that I know had contacted me, and she said, "Hey, I'm supposed to interview Ace Frehley, and I don't know anything about this kind of music. I don't know anything about Kiss or about his solo career." And she said, "I know that you're really into hard rock and heavy metal. Could you write up some questions for me that I could bring to Ace?" And so I did. I gave her like about 10 or 15 questions. And unfortunately, Ace canceled the interview, so she never got to do the interview. But I saw this woman last night, and we were talking. And in the course of the first act of this theater show, I was just thinking a lot about Ace because this woman sort of reminded me of this. And I'd seen this video with his soloing. So I was sitting there thinking about Ace, and I always turn my phone off during things like this because I don't want my phone to go off during the show. And during intermission, I turned my phone on, and I couldn't believe it. I had door messages on my phone that Ace had passed, and I was just like, I can't believe this. I was just thinking about him, in this interview, these questions that I had written up for him and everything, and this video that I saw, I had no idea. So it came as a real shock. Now, I've said on this channel that I'm a Kiss fan, but I'm not like a Kiss super fan or anything. And I often say that it really started with AC/DC's Back in Black for me. And although that's true that AC/DC was like my band, you've probably also heard me talk about how I had an uncle that was only 9 years older than me. And he was really into like Kiss, Ted Nugent, Aerosmith, but especially Kiss. And looking up to him like an older brother, I just so remember listening to his Kiss records. And I had one of those flat tape decks, and I would put the thing in front of one speaker on his stereo and record it live too, and some of the other Kiss records he had. And so really, like, Kiss was the first group that I remember liking. And the first single that I ever bought with my own money was, the first piece of music I ever bought with my own money was Dr. Love, a little 7-inch single. And I always thought that Ace was the coolest guy in the band. He just always gave off this persona, this kind of laid back, cool. And I always felt like he was the true rock and roller of the band. I would always say to people, my favorite Kiss record was Ace's solo album. And I just exactly know when I bought that record because I had taped some of the Kiss albums from my uncle, and somebody that my family knew had given me a couple Kiss records. And we were on a trip, and I don't remember where it was, but we went to a university somewhere. My dad had a relative that was going to school there, and I think it was Penn State, the main campus. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, and I bought Ace's solo record when we were on this trip, and I can remember sitting there, like my parents went to I don't know, do something, go into a store, and I was sitting outside this store, like sitting on a chair or a stoop or something, and just looking at this record and just thinking how cool Ace looked. And I've always loved that record. And again, I always felt like Ace was the guy that it came most natural for. That he was just a rock and roller, and I, with the rest of the guys in the band, the rest of their solo records, although I kind of like Paul's solo record, I just always felt like, all right, Ace is the real deal. And when you saw interviews with him and his personality, he seemed like such a laid back, funny guy. I think back to a video of them when they did this reunion tour. I think it was like in the 90s. And it was a video that was following the band around, and it was showing them like underneath the stage. All the guys were underneath the stage, and Peter Criss was singing Beth. And Ace is just kicked back in this chair with like a can of Coke. And Peter comes down. He's furious because, like, I don't know, he couldn't hear the background, the tracks or something that he was singing to. And Ace is just kind of sitting there, and he's like, don't worry, Peter, you sounded great, man. You sounded great. You always sound great, Peter. That's just the vibe that I get from him. There's another clip. Again, I was on this Ace Frehley kick the last couple of days, and they were showing up in my YouTube feed another clip where he was being interviewed by somebody on that, like a news station on that reunion tour. And he was just so laid back, so funny, so friendly to this lady that was interviewing him. And yeah, so it's just such a shock. And I don't think it's exaggerating to say that Kiss was the Beatles of my generation. I'm 55, so I was a little bit young for Kiss. But again, I clearly remember kids in my neighborhood, friends that had older brothers who were really into Kiss. And in the 70s, you couldn't... I tell this to people who are younger than me. I said, you can't understand how big Kiss was in the 70s and the influence and impact that they had. It felt like for a few years that they were just everywhere, and everybody was talking about them. All the kids were into them. I mean, we can all probably dig out a picture of us somewhere where we're dressed up like Ace for Halloween. I did it like about 15, 20 years ago. My wife did my face up like Ace, and I think there was something at my kid's school, and I went as Ace Frehley, So, we've all done it, either as adults or as kids, the lunchboxes, the action figures, and everything. So, they're a huge band, and hugely influential band, and Ace was a very influential guitar player on many guitar players of people that were maybe a little bit older than me, Dimebag Darrell, for instance. Just anybody of like that age group was influenced by Kiss. And I always loved Ace's soloing style. He's a very blues based soloist along the lines of like Paul Kossoff from Free, and Ace always had this kind of bluesy, laid back, I use the expression elastic style of playing, like these big kind of bends, and where he would just sort of hold the note out, rock it on his vibrato, and these lines that he would repeat, and these really big bends, just these really, really cool guitar solos. I always thought Ace's songs were some of the best songs on those Kiss records, like Cold Gin, Parasite. Parasite is one of my favorite guitar solos from him. Shock Me on Alive 2. We're going to turn the microphone over to Ace Frehley. Shock Me. That's just great, great stuff, man. His singing voice always reminded me of Keith Richards. Keith, no one's really going to say that Ace had a great singing voice. No one really says Keith Richards has a great singing voice, but he has kind of this cool, unique voice, and you enjoy, you look forward to it on the records. And like Shock Me was a great example of that. Rocket Ride was another one that I always really loved. Hard Times, Strange Ways. That to me was like one of their heaviest songs. Hotter Than Hell, from their early albums. I always loved that song. And his solo record, I mean, it's just fantastic. Rip It Out. That's got to be one of the greatest like album openers. Just fantastic. Speeding Back to My Baby. I always loved Snowblind. I always thought that had a cool groove to it. Ozone was another one. Has this really cool groove to it. Cool riffs in it. Fractured Mirror, the instrumental that ends that record, is great. I always felt like that guitar pattern at the beginning of Fractured Mirror sounded a lot like the opening pattern in You Can't Kill Rock and Roll, and I always wondered if Randy was influenced by that song. And even the first Frehley's Comet album, the first two Frehley's Comet albums, I love that, especially the first one, man. Rock Soldiers and even Dolls, that song Dolls. I always thought that was a fun rocker. I loved that first solo record, and I just listened to that like crazy. So it is just shocking news here because we just lost Ozzy a couple months ago, and now to lose another legend like this from such a hugely influential band. I mean, this is like, again, to the Beatles, it's like when John Lennon died, when the first Beatle died. It seemed just unbelievable, and it's kind of the same thing here. It's just such a shocker. And the Kiss guys, I guess in my mind, Kiss came a little bit later than Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Uriah Heep, and so I just wasn't expecting it yet. I mean, he was 74. It's just unbelievable, and it really makes you think about and want to appreciate the fact that we got to live like during this time. We got to enjoy and appreciate these musicians when they were here, and we should appreciate the ones that are still here because, man, you don't know what tomorrow brings. And of course, after he passed, I read that he had fallen and he had a brain bleed or something, and like I said, it's just you never know. And Ace is another one of those guys that you just kind of like Lemmy. You didn't think he would ever die. He's one of these guys. Ace is one of these guys that lived the rock and roll lifestyle. He had the excesses, and you just thought he would live forever. He's one of these guys like Lemmy that you just thought that he was just born to be like a rock star, and his body was different. He could live this legendary lifestyle. He's a guy that you could just imagine like sitting at a bar and a bunch of people gathered around him while he just tells one amazing story after another. And I'll leave you with this one story. I've talked about how college radio was really influential on me when I was younger. There were a couple of really good college radio stations when I was growing up. This is before MTV or the early days of MTV, and so it was the only way to hear like a lot of music back then. And I used to listen to these DJs on this one particular college radio station, and they had a metal show, and it always came on like 8 to 10 at night or 8 to 11 or something like that. These guys were, of course, big Kiss fans, and they had an interview set up. I guess Ace was doing a show somewhere near them, and they had an interview set up to interview Ace, and they were talking about this for felt like months leading up to it. Like, 2 months from now we're going to be interviewing Ace, and these guys were so excited leading up to it. Like the week leading up to it, they were playing stuff from a solo record. They were playing, they're just talking about it. Then the final radio show before they were supposed to interview him, they said, yeah, okay, we're interviewing Ace on Saturday night. When we come back on Monday, we'll have the interview for you. Yeah, this is going to be amazing. So Monday rolls around, and I'm like excited, like I can't wait to hear these guys' experience interviewing Ace. Again, this is a more innocent era, right, where the only way you got to read about rock stars was in magazines and stuff like that. There was a lot of mystery around rock stars. Sorry, I had to splice this in. My phone rang and threw me off my train of thought. So these DJs, Monday rolls around, and they talk about how they were supposed to interview him, and I don't remember. Maybe it was supposed to be at like a record store, or maybe it was a show. I can't remember now. And they said Ace's manager called them and said, "Listen, go and interview him at his hotel." And these guys are like, "Oh man, we're gonna get to hang out with Ace at his hotel." So they head down to the hotel, and they've got his room number, and they're telling the story. They're knocking on the door, and nobody's answering. And the door is slightly ajar. It's not closed all the way. So they're knocking. So they push the door open a little bit and look inside, and there's Ace on the bed, completely passed out. And they're like, "Hello, Mr. Frehley. Hello, Mr. Frehley." And he's just out. He's not waking up. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon or something. And you would think that these guys would be pissed off, right? Like, "Oh man, we had our interview with Ace Frehley, and then he's passed out on the bed," and you'd think they'd be mad or upset or disappointed. But the guys proceed to go, "Oh man, it was so cool. There was Ace on the bed. We just stood there for like 10 minutes and just looked at him, and we're just sitting there going, 'Oh my God, this is Ace Frehley from Kiss.'" And these guys were just outside of themselves, like it was the coolest experience ever, sitting there watching, just looking at Ace laying passed out on a bed. And I thought, that is the side of just a true rock and roll legend. I mean, just people, these guys were just happy to be in a room, and they probably still tell this story today to their kids, like, "Oh yeah, I got to see Ace. He was passed out on a bed, but I got to stand there for 10 minutes and look at him." So I always thought that was a funny, sort of endearing story to the legend that is Ace Frehley. That he's such a legend that just to be around him was something special. I mean, I never got to meet him or anything. I have a good friend, the drummer that played in my band back in Pennsylvania. He's met him a bunch of times and said that he was just a fantastic guy, and that's always the way he seems. So this is just a real loss for hard rock, for heavy metal. Ace Frehley, influential lead guitar player, influential just musician and guy and personality. So Ace Frehley, rest in peace.